Welcome to the Thankful Arnold House Museum. Located in Haddam, Connecticut, along the Connecticut River, the house was purchased by a young married couple in the early 1790s, Joseph and Thankful Arnold, as a one-room starter house with a shop below. And the one room was really the everything room. You cooked in there, you cleaned in there, you slept in there, you entertained in there. And after about 2 years of living like that, they added on to the house. So as the family grew over the next 15 to 20 years, the house grew along with it. So the Thankful Arnold House Museum is actually sort of a glimpse into what life was like for the typical middle-class Connecticut River Valley family in the early 19th century. They weren't anybody famous. What we tell is what the story was like for an average family. They were sort of the last generation of people who had extremely large families. The Arnolds did have 12 children. The Arnold House also tells the story what life was like in Haddam and the Connecticut River Valley. This area of Haddam was actually the thriving commercial center of town during that time period, around 1800. And the main reason for all the activity was the Middlesex County Courthouse, which was located right outside the front door. So there was a lot of commercial activity, there was a lot of trading, there were river ships and ports and wharfs down on the river. The main highway between Hartford and Saybrook was the Middlesex Turnpike, which went right through the center of town here. So there was a lot going on here when Joseph and Thankful bought this little house. Joseph Arnold suddenly passed away in his mid-40s, leaving Thankful a widow. And by that time, she still had 6 children under her roof, the youngest one only being about 8 years old. He died very, we believe, unexpectedly and suddenly, for a number of reasons. He didn't leave a will, he didn't leave any instructions on how to settle all his affairs, and he left poor Thankful with this huge financial mess. By law, she got 1/3 of the house for the remainder of her life, but she had to sell 2/3. And that was a concern for her because she still had 6 children living here, and if she only got 1/3 of the house, how were they all gonna live in it? And sometimes widows had to sell 2/3 to people they didn't know. And I think she was concerned that she'd end up living here with total strangers. She was lucky. Her brother-in-law bought the 2/3 for sale, did not move in, said she could live here with her family and her children, and that when her older sons were financially able to do so, they would buy the house from their uncle. And that's what happened. When Thankful passed away around the age of 74, and she died of old age, the 2 sisters continued to live in the house, Nancy and Sarah. So the house actually remained in the Arnold family for 4 generations. In the early 1960s, none of the immediate family was interested in living in the house. And there was rumors that it was going to be sold out of the Arnold family. And a cousin from Texas heard the family was going to sell the house and said he didn't want it to leave the Arnold family. So he worked with the Historical Society, bought it, restored it, and decided to turn it into a museum to honor his ancestors. And one of the more interesting stories about the house is that in the 1963-1965 restoration, they were doing some plaster repair on this wall here with Isaac Jr.'s portrait. And inside the wall, they discovered that the wall cavity was full of hundreds and hundreds of pieces of broken dishes, broken ceramics, sherds. Why was it in the wall? How did it get in the wall? And where did it all come from? The adjacent room is the back parlor, and this was added on around 1800, and it doubled the size of the house, and then they put 2 finished bedrooms up above us. This is where they would come when they weren't doing their chores or their business and gather and meet and talk about the day's events. The children might play in here, the women might sew or knit or do their embroidery. The boys might play a game of checkers, and it was also the dining room. This is the historic kitchen of the Thankful Arnold House Museum. It was added on around 1810. Thankful was still using the very traditional methods of cooking, using the beehive bake oven for baking, as well as using the large hearthstone for most of her daily cooking, as well as having water or stews or other things being over the open fire. This time early spring, they're probably getting ready to plant their small vegetable garden outside. Thankful did have an extensive garden, root vegetables primarily, things that could last up into their root cellar, like turnips and onions and squash and things like that. But she also had an extensive herb garden. And she used herb for household and cooking purposes, but mostly for medicinal purposes. Someone had a cold in the family, she would make an herbal tea for them. If someone had a headache, there was an herb to cure that. If someone had an upset stomach, she'd have tea for that. So it was really important for her because she couldn't run down to the local pharmacy and pick up something if one of her children got sick, that she would have to really rely on what she was growing in her garden. It's interesting to learn how and why they used some of the plants. For example, they had herbs they thought would cure baldness. Now, why they thought baldness was an issue back then, I don't know. They had an herb they thought could change your eye color. Why they thought you needed to change your eye color back then, it's not clear to me. So they had herbs and sort of medicinal plants that they thought could cure all sorts of issues. We call it the Thankful Arnold House for a couple of reasons. One, she lived here much longer than he did. Yes, he was the man in the family and he was the one who paid for it originally, but she did live here a much longer time than he did because he died quite young. And it became known as the Widow Arnold's House for much of the 19th century, at least the mid-19th century. And I think people associated the house with her, not so much him. And I think it gave us an opportunity to tell what the story of women was like. I encourage everyone to come visit the Thankful Arnold House. We are open year-round, and we're here Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and then in the summer we're here on Sunday afternoons, and you won't be disappointed.